I was out with my parents gathering drinks and food for Saturnalia when I got my first hint that something wasn't right. Saturnalia was everyone's favorite part of the year. Another year was ending and the sun was weakening in the sky, so we would have our 7-day long festival that would bring the sun back. 7 days of gambling, drinking, eating, partying, and gifts to celebrate the king of the Titans. I was young enough not to drink the heavy stuff like all of the adults, but I was also old enough to watch over the children, so they would have more appropriate fun during the 7 days of the festival. My first hint was when my father needed to spend a lot of extra time in the apothecary. He suffered from epilepsy, so he needed specially made medication, but it usually didn't last that long. Still, I didn't think that much of it. My father was finally named the King of Saturnalia this year, and he was taking his role of being in charge of the festivities quite seriously. It made sense when you think about it. His name was also Saturn, and there were posters all over Insula Solis, the island we lived on. My father had a big thing about names. Even though my mother's name was Amanda, he often called her his Jewel because she wouldn't accept being called Ops. He thought it was a great idea to name me, his eldest son, Pluto, with the expectation of having many other children. But it was still just me, and I was still going to be in demand this Saturnalia. Most years I would be babysitting a child or two, but this year I was in charge of all of the guests as children that were coming to the Nobilis villa. A lot of children. Still, though, at least I had a budget and I was in charge, which was a lot of fun. My father finally left the apothecary and his medication in his satchel. The three of us went to the market proper. The market of Insula Solis was the envy of Europa. It was leagues across, with everything on sale, it seemed. Fresh baked goods, fruits, smoked meats, sweets, flowers, some of which were owned by the same families for thousands of years, that were sold alongside smartphones, video games, and quadcopters. Every time I went, I felt a connection to everyone before me. All of my ancestors came to this same market. Some of them ate the exact same food in the exact same place, and all had the same feeling of excitement looking for new things. Sure, they weren't waiting for the latest computer and the best Gothic video game to arrive from Europa, but they were just as excited. Probably excited for the newest playing cards, dice, and gambling games to come from across the sea. Nearly every stall I ran across was selling dice of some kind. Even the florist was selling dice of all kinds and sides. Owning dice, cards, and board games were legal all year, but gambling on them was strictly outlawed on the island, except for the 7 days of Saturnalia. So people made up for lost time as much as they could. Naturally, merchants smelled opportunity and sold these items in spades in the weeks leading up to Saturnalia. I wasn't a gambler, nor a drinker, think Libera, but even I could see the appeal of all the dice and cards. Everyone tried to sell unique dice that were pleasing to look at, and there was a niche community of dice and card collectors. They didn't gamble, they just bought and collected these items, and the more unique it looked, or the better the story, the more it was worth. I could already see a fight breaking out over a merchant selling dice, and two teens, barely 11 years old, were fighting over the last 20-sided dice to be made out of mother of pearl. They weren't merely yelling. I watched as one child was biting on the arm of the other, already drawing blood while they were both growling, their parents nowhere to be seen. "We're staying away from that," my father said, as we made our way to the merchants I wanted to see first. The advantage of the open air market was that you could see what you were buying. The downside is if you bought in bulk, you were carrying it all by yourself. But thankfully, most of the merchants knew about the Nobilis family, so we could pay for it and have it delivered to our villa before the day was over. A convenience of the past and present put together. The first merchant we saw was selling coloring books and colored wax. They had the advantage of being able to draw on paper without being sharp nor toxic. And the coloring books weren't the cheap kind you found dropped by the side of the street. They were the kind usually sold to adults, with a story and extreme detail. I knew it was a lot to expect from the children, but I figured they'd appreciate it. "So, do you think you can drop off 3 dozen of these books with 3 dozen boxes of wax to the villa today, Granny Greta?" I asked the merchant. An old woman who was old even when my grandfather was young. No one knew who she was related to, but everyone on the island called her Granny, even among the other elders. Unfortunately for me, she was still as mentally sharp as ever. "Can I do it? Sure, not a problem. Let's say 20 per book and 5 per box of wax. That'll be 1,620. Sound fair to you?" she said with a smile, and her golden tooth flashed like a fang at me. We both knew this game, and we knew what I was going to say. "What? No, I will pay 700 coppers for that amount," I told her, and her eyes glinted from what I was saying. "Coppers? I don't deal in copper or steel, pup. We only deal in silver or gold at this table. 1,200 silver for the books and wax boxes," she said, her hands moving as she spoke. Everyone spoke with their hands on the island, and it was as much a part of the language as the vowels and consonants. In fact, to me, if someone tried speaking to me without their hands, I would be more confused than anything. It's hard to tell their tone without it. But for now, Granny Greta was still playing around. "Funny you don't deal in copper and steel. No wonder most people cannot afford your stall," I said playfully, and she acted like she was stabbed for a moment before chuckling. It was all a part of the negotiation. She knew it wasn't a real insult to her, but if I did actually insult her, she would drive her price up, or worse, refuse to do business with me at all. "Your family would know all about copper. I'm surprised your skin isn't green from all that jewelry," she spat back. And now it was my turn to act offended. My family came from a long line of copper and lead miners, but for the most part, it was enough, but we weren't wealthy by any means. But 200 years ago, demand exploded, and we went from lower middle class to new money patricians. 200 years may seem like a long time, but with the history of the island, 200 years was a lot like we found the money on the ground. "I'll have you know, my jewelry is all real, genuine, radium, uranium, and plutonium. So we can keep hanging around you all day if you want, or you can accept 250 silver and go home with all of your hair and teeth," I said, raising my amount by only a little. And now it was her turn to feel the pain of history. Granny Greta made her money by having her cottage being directly on top of a uranium mine. The safety procedures were supposed to keep her safe, and from what the doctors all said, she wasn't radioactive. But still, few visitors came to her home anymore, fearing they would be exposed to radiation. I brush my teeth with radium. You don't scare me. 350 silver, she said, taking a big dip down. I made an impact on her, and I knew that she expected the negotiation to end soon. The longer we stood around negotiating, the less time she had for other customers. And with less time for other customers who were more likely to pay more, I went up so slowly that she didn't even try to wind up around the middle, which, now that I think about it, was rather odd. 275, I said, my arms crossed, and I tapped one foot. I didn't even try to act like it was going to be something else. I was going firm, and now she was going to have a final choice. Accept my offer or take a big risk and assume I was bluffing. She made her choice. 325 is my final offer, Granny Greta said with a wicked smile. She was now making her play, and there was a 50 silver difference. Very well, I said, and I put the coloring book and colored wax down, and I took a step back with a neutral face. I could see Granny Greta's face fall as I spoke out loud to my parents. Come on, we can find a cheaper place elsewhere, I said, and I started to walk away. I was careful to walk away casually, but not too casually. I was still playing the game, but Granny Greta had to assume I was trying to quit the game. Okay, 275 silver, Granny Greta yelled out, and I smiled to myself before turning around, pretending for a moment to think about it before I stuck out my arm and grabbing her wrist, and she grabbed mine. Deal, we both said at the same time, as I pulled out the credit card to pay for the books and the colored wax. After it was paid for and the receipt emailed, we stared at each other for a moment before Granny Greta burst out laughing. Great job, kid. I've not had a negotiation like that in decades. I really thought you were leaving. That's my secret, Granny. I really was leaving. If you didn't speak up, I would have left. I told her, and I saw a bit of the sparkle in her eyes leave. She saw that I was serious. You're a deal maker, Pluto. You'd make your namesake proud, she said, and I smiled. I saw something flash behind her eyes as she leaned in and whispered to me, If anything happens or you need somewhere to go, my door is always open to you. Come by my cottage, she whispered to me, before letting go and turning to my father and mother. He's got his skills from you both, clearly. If he was any better, I would have been paying him for the privilege of having these books, she said with a chuckle, which brought a chuckle from my parents and didn't give them a chance to think about her pulling me close to her. After they spoke to her for a few moments, and my father invited her to Saturnalia, she simply shook her head. I'm not a young woman anymore. The festivities will take a lot more than it gives for me, but I don't mind. I will be quietly reading during the 7 days, she said with a smile, and my father and mother didn't think much of it as we continued. The next stall we visited had sweet shoes by the kilogram, though calling it a stall was a bit of a misnomer. There were dozens of wooden buckets full of sweets in wax paper, in many flavors: cherry, extinct banana flavor, Honeycrisp apple, sour green apple, apple pie, cinnamon, blueberry, even wine flavor. I ordered a kilogram of each taffy to be sent to the villa. The merchant was a lot happier to have such a large sale. He eagerly accepted 15 copper per kilogram, despite the 50 copper per kilogram signs. I guess that was what he needed. That finished, my parents led the way to the vintner. The vintner's stall was at the edge of the pier, and he sold many wines. Dozens of casks stood behind the vintner, who sold brands from all over the island, and even acted as an importer of wines outside the island. He had a bushy mustache and dressed in blue denim, when most merchants still wore white robes. He knew how good his wine was, so he didn't have to look powerful, which only made him stand out more by not trying to stand out at all. Saturn, I have your special blend. It was a difficult request to obtain, especially in that quantity, but we have 300 barrels of Somnia's special Saturnalian spirit synthesis shipped from Scythia. Each barrel has enough thick wine to fill 300 bottles of wine. I am happy to mix the wine with water before shipping it, which would give you, that's all right. We will mix it ourselves at the villa. Make it a game, my father said, and the vintner shrugged. If you say so. But even so, that's a lot of barrels, and they were not easy to obtain. So I'm afraid my price has gone up from what we previously negotiated. By how much? 10 gold per barrel. 10 gold per barrel? Not ideal, but I can pay for it, my father said, only for the vintner to chuckle in response. You misunderstand me, Mr. Nobilis. It hasn't gone up to 10 gold per barrel. It has gone up by 10 gold per barrel. It is now 15 gold per barrel, the vintner said with a glint in his eye. My father looked at him for a moment before he shrugged, and he handed his credit card over with no argument. Just get the blend to my villa, my father said, while the three of us just stared at him. Negotiation was the lifeblood of Insula Solis. The only kind of people who didn't even try to negotiate at the market were tourists, especially with a markup of 200% of what was previously negotiated. At those rates, it was like paying for a 4-year degree for an entire high school. And that was just the wine. A massive cost. Just for the wine. Are you sure, sweetie? My mother asked, and he waved it off. This is going to be the greatest Saturnalia ever. We can afford it, he said as the vintner nodded. He was happy to make such a large sale. We moved on to the other merchants. He bought potatoes, ham, bread, butter, and oil, all by the hundreds of kilograms. I knew the party was supposed to be for all of Insula Solis, for several hundred residents, but even so, that was a lot of food. The food was purchased, and then we made our way back to the villa. There was already full-time staff in the villa, but this year he hired additional staff for the cooking and preparation for Saturnalia. Father was very clear that he and mother were preparing for the adults, while I was preparing for the children. These days rushed by, but now I wish I paid more attention. Maybe there was something I missed, something I could have done to prevent all of this from happening. The days were getting shorter and shorter than what was normal for December, but still it felt wrong. The first day of Saturnalia, the sun didn't rise until 9 a.m., and by then the partying began. There was dancing and music and drinking in the streets. Every business was closed, and it was loud. The Nobilis Villa was one of the loudest. There was music playing in every building, and there were barrels of wine in every corner. In the kids' building, there were a lot less children than I was expecting. There was Vanessa, a daughter of a family friend, and her younger twin sisters, Gemini and Vesta. But everyone else who answered to the invitation as a yes decided to stay home instead. Still, though, I tried to make sure everyone had fun. Gemini and Vesta spent most of the party singing along with carols, while drawing and chewing on the sweet shoes. Vanessa spent the time watching Share My Day, watching all of the big parties all over the world. She didn't talk with me often, and I think she preferred being alone. As the sun started to set around noon, I watched the sun set behind the distant light tower, and soon as that last sliver of sunlight disappeared, there was a loud cheer that rang across the entire island. In a very symbolic way, they were worshipping the sun, and they were waiting for the sun to come back. Otherwise, it would vanish, leaving the world in perpetual winter. Even though there was a cheer across the island, and I have seen it many times, this time a shiver ran down my body. We drank apple cider and put on winter movies. Not everyone in the world celebrated Saturnalia, but quite a few people celebrated similar winter holidays. And naturally, movies occurred, but there were tons of variations. Stories of elves making gifts before sneaking them into children's shoes. Witches passing out candy to good children. Saints that handed out gifts all around the world. Or about monsters that dragged bad children to hell. All were movies that we watched while outside the partygoers got louder and louder. Around midnight we curled up into our sleeping bags, while the muffled laughter and screams outside continued. Saturnalia usually had partying that went on all night, but still we needed sleep. Eventually, we fell asleep and then woke up into darkness. I checked my phone and there was no data connection, but it still told the time, 10:45 a.m. And there was no sun outside, not even a dim dawn. I grabbed my coat and I went outside to see what was happening while Vanessa, Gemini, and Vesta were sleeping. It was cold outside. Not normal winter cold, but a lot colder. I could see my breath, and there were a few wine-colored puddles that were frozen solid. Frost coated the ground, and oddly enough, I couldn't see anyone outside at all. Saturnalia was well known for being a drinking holiday. I was used to seeing passed out drunks in the morning after the first night. But now there were no partygoers outside at all. There was evidence of the partygoers, spilled wine and beer that froze in the cold weather. There was trash that crumpled and blew across the street, broken glass, and even a few brown handprints on the buildings. I wrapped my coat around me tighter, As I made my way back to the villa, maybe I could ask my father or mother, since clearly something wasn't right here. When I made it to my villa, it was just more of the same. Clear indications of a large party. There was dice, trash, spilled wine and beer, discarded food, even a few knuckle bones and a skull, so you knew it was a proper party. I even saw a few bloodstains, mostly on the ground and wall, but still, it wasn't a concern. It wasn't unheard of for people to have nosebleeds or for accidents to occur. That was probably all that happened. Still, though, I turned on the lights in my parents' building as I went to their personal bedroom. Our villa isn't too different from most villas. There were personal buildings for each person that contained a bathroom, closet, bedroom, and a room for meeting others. It could lead out into the street or into a central plaza that led back into the other buildings. It gave us privacy and space on an island that often felt crowded, but when I went into my parents' building, something felt wrong. The building somehow felt colder than the outside, and it was dark inside. Every light bulb was smashed, and all of the wine barrels were tipped over, frozen on the ground. The trash, wine, and frost all mixed on the tile, and it cracked with every step that I took. Normally, I would have opened some of the shutters to let in light from the outside, but even though it was almost noon, there was still no sun nor moonlight outside. There were a few street lamps that were on, but they didn't cast enough light to light up the inside of the building. I made my way to their sleeping quarters. The door was closed and it was a lot colder. My hand stuck to the doorknob for a second from the cold as I turned it and pushed it open to reveal my parents' room. This room was even more trashed than the rest of the house. The bookcases and books lay scattered across the floor, which I knew that my mother was going to be upset about. She spent years building her collection of books. Quite a few of them were very old and were either difficult to obtain or they were quite literally unique books that didn't exist anywhere else on Earth. She never let anyone so much as touch them, let alone leave them scattered and destroyed on the ground. But here they all laid, scattered on the ground, covered in brown, red, and, oddly enough, green stains. There was a single light bulb left unbroken, and it flickered directly over the bed, where a tangled up blanket showed a single person was still there. I slowly approached, thinking it was my mother. During Saturnalia, it was common for my father to collapse into a different bed. I approached the bed in the flickering light, and as I pulled the blanket, I noticed it had a large red-brown stain on the white comforter. Mother was going to be upset about the wine stain, I thought to myself, as I pulled the blanket off the figure. In the middle of the bed wasn't my mother, like I thought, but it was Vanessa's mother, looking pale and still. Rhea lied, pale and still. My first thought when looking at her was she spilled wine all over herself. The red-brown stain from the blanket was coming from her stomach on through her white robes. But then I noticed the smell. like pork left out all night, and was starting to turn. Her pale eyelids weren't closed like I thought at first. They were open and staring up at the ceiling, but they were milky and clouded over. After I realized what was happening, I couldn't help but start laughing. This couldn't possibly be happening. A lot of things happen on Saturnalia, but this never happened. She had to have been sick, hungover, or maybe it was a prank played on me, or I was misunderstanding what was happening. I I had to be misunderstanding what was happening. Her stomach wasn't actually cut open. That wasn't her blood, excrement, and bile all over the sheets and comforter, spilling down onto the scattered books on the floor. Mother and father would never let anything bad like this happen, especially not on Saturnalia, not during the happiest time of the year. Mother didn't even let sodas near her bed. She wouldn't let anyone bleed all over her clean white sheets and comforter. This, this couldn't be real. I had to be seeing this wrong. None of this made sense. The sun still wasn't up. The sun always rises every day. Even if there was a storm outside, and the clouds were as thick as mountains, some kind of light would shine through. This, this couldn't be reality. And if this wasn't reality, then it was my perception that was wrong. If my perception was wrong, then I needed help. And the most sane thing to do when you're insane is get help. I remember that mantra from my high school teacher. I repeated it to myself as I turned to leave my parents' room, but I couldn't help but notice it looked like a word was directly written over my parents' door leading out. I wouldn't have seen it coming in, only when leaving. Written over the door was the name Juno, written in what appeared to be blood that was still red, but starting to turn brown. When I left my parents' building, I stayed focused on two things: breathing and getting back to my building. I recognized the door to my building by the angel carved over it. She had wide wings and wide open arms, like she was welcoming me into a hug or comfort. But what made this angel unique compared to a lot of other angel statues on Insula Solis was that she had no face. Underneath her hood, her face was smooth and featureless. A lot of people found it creepy, but I thought it was pretty cool. Normally, I smiled when I saw her, but this time, it felt like she was hiding something from me. I entered my building and went to the meeting room, where the party was last night. Vanessa, Gemini, and Vesta were all asleep, and all I could do was sit in a corner. Something was wrong, and all I could do was sit here. Logically, I knew what I should do. Use my phone to call Vanguard. Maybe wake up the girls so that we could plan our next action. Or try to text my parents. But in that moment, all I could do was sit there in the corner and breathe. Every breath was freezing, and with every exhale, I could see my breath. Every inhale hurt my throat, and I felt like I did something wrong, like I did something to deserve it. I kept thinking back to last night. Maybe I did something to deserve all this. I watched them sleep as my hands started shaking, and something inside me bent and twisted to try and justify what I saw and why I was the one seeing it. Maybe I finally pushed myself too far, and I was stuck in a place where my psyche snapped. Maybe I was doused with alcohol or chems last night in the apple cider. I know I went to great lengths to stay sober, and I was certain everything was clean, but still, maybe I messed up. Maybe I dosed myself and forced myself to forget. Maybe I dosed myself and I didn't forget, but I was denying that I knew it to keep myself from feeling guilty. My mind twisted more and more, anything to justify this all as my fault in some way. I even thought I was sent to Avernus, and this was my eternal punishment for not being a good enough son. But what finally broke me out of the cycle was when Vanessa woke up and she saw me staring off into space. She laughed and waved at me. Happy Saturnalia! It was said so casually and so happily that I started sobbing uncontrollably. I couldn't say why, but that very simple statement broke something in me that was just twisting and twisting, but then just snapped. I just sobbed and held my hands over my eyes as Vanessa came over and tried to get my attention. I tried to tell her what was wrong, but the words didn't come out right. Don't go outside, don't go outside, don't go outside, don't go outside, was all I managed to say. Like there was a disconnect between what I wanted to say, what my thoughts were, and what was coming out of my mouth. And I had to sync them all back up. Okay, we won't go outside, I promise. Now, take a deep breath and then tell me what is wrong. She told me, her hands up, and I sobbed for a few more moments. Her sisters were still, mysteriously sleeping peacefully. After a few moments, I finally just took a few breaths, and then I started to talk. Something is wrong outside. Something is wrong with me. It doesn't make sense. I need help. She needs help, I said, and Vanessa held up her hand. Okay, something is wrong. Should I call your parents, or do you want me to call Vanguard? She asked me. Yes, I responded. Does that mean both? Yes, I said. I was barely aware of what she was doing. I watched blankly, only vaguely aware of Vanessa grabbing her phone as she tried calling my father, then my mother, then her mother, and then finally the Vanguard. It was the same response each time. No network. She still tried to call Vanguard again, even with no network, and there was still no network to connect. It's a common misconception that if your phone says there's no network, that means emergency services are completely unreachable. However, contacting emergency services was allowed on any network, even those that weren't paid for. Even phones without any mobile network at all could call emergency services, even without the SIM card. Still, though, there was no response, and that wasn't right. I'm going to try to call my mom again, Vanessa said, and I paled and felt fresh tears come to my face. Still, no network. But I knew I would never tell Vanessa why I was crying again. Okay, we can't call anyone. So, what should we do next? Check on your parents? She asked me. Looking back on it, she was trying to give me choices, so I felt like I had control after all the stress I was under. I had no clue where Vanessa learned that from. They're not home. No one is. Don't know where they are, I said, hugging my knees. My thoughts felt like they were going too fast for me to catch, but also far too slow to do anything. If I was thinking logically, I probably would have avoided so much pain. Okay, let's try the Vanguard station. They're only a few blocks away. If anything happened, that's where everyone is supposed to go, she said, and I nodded. It's cold outside. Need to bundle up, I said, finally relaxing my grip on my knees, and Vanessa nodded. Okay, I'll wake up the twins. Can you get jackets for us? She asked, and I nodded. I went to my closet in a daze and grabbed some of the jackets I got from our trip to the northern forest. Insula Solis almost never got below freezing temperature, so my traditional jacket would not have been enough. I grabbed the jacket and scarves and wrapped my face in it. I walked back to the others, where I offered the jackets. Vanessa eyed it suspiciously. Are you sure it's that cold? She asked me, and I nodded. So she shrugged and took the jackets. It was a bit big on her, and a lot bigger on the twins, but it was going to have to do. Where are we going? Gemini asked, wearing her blue flower beret. Vesta wore a yellow flower beret. We're going to see if we can find the others, Vanessa told her. And then Vesta asked, Why is the sun still down? And Vanessa shook her head. It must be really cloudy outside, but it is daytime even if it doesn't look like it, Vanessa said, and I checked my phone. It was now 1 p.m., and there was still no sun. When we went outside, even in my jacket, I could feel the brisk cold, and my breath was visible as I breathed through my scarf. But at least it wasn't hurting anymore. The sky above still had no sun, no moon, and no stars as far as I could see. The external lights were on, but they looked weaker than normal, and the street lights only dimly lit our path, like a line of will-o-wisps. Vanessa led the way down the street, holding both of her sister's hands while I followed, hyper-aware of everything. The breeze moved some of the trash around, but the frost still covered everything. That told me it was below freezing everywhere. That never happened here. It might get below freezing for a bit, but never for long. The sun and sea always warmed Insula Solis, but where was the sun? We crested the street and we could see Vanguard Station. The lights in front of it were still on, which was a relief. But what wasn't a relief was the fountain in front of the station. The fountain wasn't flowing, and as we got closer, we saw that the reservoir on the base was frozen. But when we saw what was under the ice, Vanessa quickly pulled her sisters to the Vanguard steps. Someone left a mess in the fountain. Don't want you getting sick, she said as she pulled them along. It was a good lie, and it wasn't a lie at the same time. I saw what was in the reservoir and the base of the fountain. Underneath the ice, with a steel trident stabbed through his anus and through his body, exiting out his ruined head, was what used to be a person. Underneath the ice, it wasn't clear who it was. Not that I wouldn't have been able to have recognized him without the face. But carved into the top of the ice and filled with blood, so it froze in red, was another name, Neptune. The Vanguard station was quiet and clean. Trash and more red-brown stains were on the steps leading up to the station. But the top of the station, beyond the statues of faceless angels, There was no trash, no blood, no wine, and no ice. We stepped into the station and we were blasted with the warmth. "Hello?" the twins called out together. Only their echo responded, and Vanessa and I turned to each other. We silently agreed that splitting up was a bad idea, but if something happened in the station, we didn't want the twins to find it. "Do you want to look for help while I stay with them?" I offered to her, and she nodded. I led them to the waiting area, which had coloring books, while Vanessa went deeper into the station. We waited and we played games while Vanessa explored. After 15 minutes, Vanessa returned a bit pale and she did a customer service smile. "I didn't find anyone, but I still found something," she said, showing her phone to me. I looked at it and I realized why she didn't want to say what she saw. In the electrical room of the Vanguard station, there was the chief of the Vanguard, a heavy-set man who always had a happy smile and a good word for everyone. He was tied to many bare wires that pierced directly into his flesh. It was clear whoever did this to him did it slow, snaking bare copper wire through his bones, entering and exiting his skin in multiple points, and where the copper touched his skin, it was cooked. But they left his face untouched and gave him that King of Saturnalia hat. In blood, in front of where his body was hanging, was the name Jupiter. "There's no one here. I think there's a few things we can find here that'll help, but I don't know where we can go. Vanguard Station is where we're supposed to go in emergencies. Maybe we can find my mom?" Vanessa offered, and I shook my head. "No, we can't." "Why not?" "I found her." Those 3 words hit her hard, but she handled it better than I did. She was silent for a moment before she spoke. "Should we stay here? If there's going to be help from the mainland, you're supposed to go to Vanguard Station first," she offered, but I shook my head. "Whatever did that can come back," I told her. "Where do you suggest we go then?" she hissed at me. I thought for a moment before I answered. "Granny Greta's." Her house was pretty far, all the way on the eastern end of the island, not far from the eastern lighthouse. It was a trek, but I had a feeling she might have a better idea of what to do than we did. "All right, Granny Greta's, but we are gathering supplies first," she said, heading back into the station to grab some more things, while I waited with her sisters. While I waited, I lifted my fingers to my eyes. I realized that I had no more tears to cry. At this point, I no longer felt the panic overtake me. I just wanted to be safe here. I stared up at the lights while the twins played, and I thought about why this place was still so warm and powered when the rest of the island was struggling to get power. I remembered learning back in school earlier that year that Insula Solis was primarily powered by solar and tidal generators. There was so much sun during most of the year that during the day the excess power would be diverted into large power cells and used to power the island at night. Tidal generators generated a much smaller portion of the island's power supply, maybe 20% at most, but it was helpful for getting reliable power during periods of time when solar energy may be inconsistent. But that was the rest of the island. The Vanguard station was built with the absolute worst case scenarios in mind. During a dim out or power cut, when power demand on the rest of Insula Solis exceeded what could be output, Vanguard Station switched to its own personal geothermal energy plant that was built deep under the station. It provided clean, warm water, heat, and power to Vanguard Station, allowing the Vanguard Station to act as a functioning nerve center when everything else failed. Now curious, I opened my phone again and opened a rarely used app. Most people think about their phones as being only useful if connected to their phone company. What a lot of people don't realize is a lot of their phones still connect to frequency modulated radio. I put in a single headphone and switched the radio on my phone as I scanned through the stations. There was nothing at first. The mainland stations all only played static. Insula Solis wasn't big enough to have a lot of stations, so we usually got our music and news from the mainland stations. But we did have one radio station that was our own. Lighthouse Radio. Not the modern lighthouse we saw on the eastern side, but the oldest building on all of Insula Solis. Originally built by Comet travelers returning from exploring the continent of Vespucci to the far west. The old lighthouse had been rebuilt over a dozen times by over 24 nations. A little over 20 years ago, it was bought by a hobbyist who turned it into a radio station. DJ JD, as he called himself, set up music to play when he wasn't talking on his radio show. Nothing too exciting, local news, weather, and a story hour once a day. Still, though, I was pleasantly surprised to hear DJ JD's familiar voice at first, until I actually heard what he was saying. Apollo doesn't dare show his face. The only light we need is Saturn. Diana hides behind Nyx. The only light we need is Saturn. Shed your blood for Saturn. Shed their blood for Saturn. Blessed be our true king, the man who struck the sun from the sky and ended the cycle of patricide. With the death of Juno, we have no fear of the heavens. With the death of Neptune, we have no fear of the sea. With the death of Jupiter, we have no fear of the storm. When we kill Ceres, we will have no fear of hunger. When we kill Vesta, we will have no fear of cold nor flame. And when we kill Pluto, we will have no fear of death nor hell. The cycle will be broken forever. Son will never slay father again. There was silence on the radio for a moment before DJ JD began to sing something odd. March, minions of Saturn, march, minions of Saturn, march, minions of Saturn. There's gods for you to slay. There's gods for you to slay. There's gods for you to slay. He sang before he began to repeat it, and I tried other stations. There had to be someone else speaking. Something wasn't right with DJ JD, but still something about what he said unsettled me. How did he know about Juno, Neptune, and Jupiter? Who were these minions of Saturn? My father? No, that couldn't be possible. My father was a lot of things, but he wasn't a murderer, let alone a deicidal cult leader. Still, though, a shiver ran up my spine until I made it to the emergency frequency, where I heard an automated message. Citizens of Insula Solis. Severe cold warning is in effect for the entire island. No one should be outside. The temperature minimum is expected to exceed 40 degrees below zero. Shelter in place for as long as possible. If you are unable to shelter in place, please dress as warmly as possible and make your way to the Vanguard station. This severe weather warning is expected to last indefinitely. The threat level is Megiddo. I repeat, this severe weather is expected to last indefinitely. The threat level is Megiddo. Once I heard that, I turned off the radio and sat back down. This weather was expected to get to -40 indefinitely. We had to get help. We did not have the infrastructure to survive such an event. Even the Vanguard station wouldn't be able to handle such a cold temperature forever. But it was the threat level that unsettled me the most. Threat levels took a bunch of factors into play, such as how bad a situation was, what resources were available, how many casualties already occurred, and the likelihood of further casualties, among other factors. Threat levels ranged from pebble, stone, rock, boulder, hill, mountain, Megiddo, and Chishulba. A pebble was the equivalent to a rainstorm expected to make it difficult to drive. Chichubla meant an apocalyptic event was occurring and survival was not possible. Megiddo event that an apocalyptic event was possible, and it required the confirmed deaths between 500 million and 2 billion people before it can even be announced. This was obviously very bad, and I didn't want to tell them. Defeatism was far too easy. I had to remain hopeful, and if that meant keeping a secret, I would keep a secret. Finally, Vanessa returned with some backpacks and thermal clothing, made for exploring the tundras of the northern forest. I could also see MREs and water bottles in those bags. Those are good finds, but I have an idea. Can you keep an eye on them while I check? I asked Vanessa, who turned and then shrugged. Be quick, it's eerie here, she responded, and I made my way to the chief's office. The stencil on the door read it as belonging to Chief Jove. Vanessa wouldn't have known what to look for, because she hasn't been here before, but I remembered it from my internship a few years ago. Underneath the chief's desk, there was a rug that had to be removed to reveal the safe underneath. He didn't know all those years ago I saw him unlock his safe. I doubt he changed the code all these years, and sure enough, I was correct. Inside the safe was a single standard infantry pistol, or SIP for short. It had 12 rounds inside already, with an extra reload in the safe. I checked the safety and put them both into my backpack. I practiced my shoot at the shooting range with my father a few times, so I hoped it would be enough to keep me safe. But it was clearly dangerous out there with what I heard on the radio. After closing the safe, I grabbed the keys from behind the desk. Keys to one of Vanguard's vehicles, nicknamed the Killer Pillar, from the soldiers who saw them in action during the Great War. It was an electric vehicle that was designed to withstand artillery, poison gas, anti-tank mines, and numerous threats. The vehicle was functional even in negative 100-degree weather. And the best part? It can trek across roads, dirt, ice, and even in water. Their only real downside was the fact that they were expensive, and there were only two on the island. But I figured it was going to be worth the cost. If we got out of this, I would work the rest of my life paying for it if I had to. I came out to where Vanessa and her sisters were, and they were all dressed for cold weather. I showed her the keys and she took a moment to register. A car? I'm not sure if a car will get through the streets. It's not a car, it's a killer pillar. If there's anywhere on Earth it cannot go, I haven't found it yet. I practiced driving one when I interned with the Vanguard, I told her as I led them to the garage. The killer pillar had 8 wheels and it was built to resemble a very large caterpillar, hence its name. Vanessa got into the side seat with me and her sisters got in the back when I turned on the engine. Thankfully, it was fully charged and I gently put my foot on the gas pedal and rammed the vehicle through the metal gate. Sorry, I yelled to everyone as I drove the clunky vehicle to Granny's Greta's. It was as clunky as I remembered, and it seemed like there was a lot more trash and debris all over the ground as I did my best to get through the narrow streets. In the back seat, Gemini and Vesta were playing rock, paper, scissors, while Vanessa and I tried to figure out how to get to Granny Greta's house. Snow had begun to fall from the sky, and even though the vehicle was meant to handle snow, I had no experience driving in the snow at all. I also learned very quickly that my few lessons in a parking lot from a few years ago were not sufficient when I kept running over trash cans and running into buildings all over Insula Solis. You sure you don't want to go back? I think there's a few buildings we might have missed, Vanessa joked, and I flipped her off in response, while adjusting the gears, allowing the killer pillar to finally chug along the street that would lead us to Granny Greta's. Do you think we will still get to do the thing when there's no one to give us the things for the thing? Gemini asked from the back. What thing are you talking about? I asked her, and it only got more confusing. The thing we were supposed to do yesterday but couldn't. Mother said we could today, but then we had to do the other thing, and now I don't know if we'll get a chance to do the thing we were promised. Gemini said, not clarifying anything at all, but now her sister decided to contribute. Mother promised, Mother promised, Mother promised, Vesta said. Well, I had no idea what was being said. We'll do it after the storm is over. None of us planned for the storm, Vanessa told her sisters, which calmed them down, but still I had no idea what they were talking about. What were you talking about? I asked Vanessa in a whisper, who whispered back, The Saturnalia scavengers seek and search, she said, like that was a completely normal sentence that answered anything. You're gonna have to explain that. Mother always hides the Saturnalia gifts somewhere on Insula Solis. We tend to spend all of Saturnalia unraveling the clues to find them. She hides little caches both with clues and some of the gifts. She usually marked them with a painting of a golden dove. We got the first clue last night, somewhere dark and hidden, but we usually try to find them with Mother's help. But I don't think we're going to find a lot during this storm, Vanessa explained. Oh, okay. My family doesn't do that. My father usually gives me a purse full of silver, and my mother gives me a box of dice. And they tell me to win my presents from the others, I whispered back. Well, that seems odd to me. Also, why are we whispering? Vanessa whispered. I don't know, I responded as we traveled in silence. The snow got higher and higher as I turned to follow the road, and I saw fire in the distance. Not too far ahead, but far enough that I sped up a bit on the frozen brick. I was about to announce it, but then I saw that the twins were asleep in the back, and Vanessa was also deeply asleep, even though we were just talking less than a minute ago. So I let them sleep as I approached the fire, and as I got closer, I saw that it was a bonfire built to cover the entire street. There was no way past it. I saw numerous figures standing on the surrounding buildings. In the firelight, all I could see was the dimly human-like shapes, dancing and jumping with large sticks. Odd, for sure. Bonfires weren't common this time of year, and definitely not in the city. As I pulled closer, I grabbed the receiver and made sure it was tuned for the speakers on the outside. Even as I spoke through the loudspeakers, Vanessa and her sisters didn't stir at all. "Hello, can you help us?" I said, and the figures continued with their celebration. They danced, jumped, and laughed. They had large barrels that they drank from by dipping their hands into it and lifting the thick wine that was so red that even in the low light of the flames, it was visible as it dripped from their hands and mouths. I was certain that they heard me, but they didn't seem to care. "Can you please help us? I'm Pluto Oculi Ori Nobilis, with Vanessa Bellator Victoria, Gemini Victoria, and Vesta Victoria. We don't know what's going on, and we need help," I said again, and this time everyone stopped dancing and moving, and they all turned to face the vehicle. I felt like I did something wrong, like I yelled in a classroom, and now everyone was staring at me. Now the only noise was the fire crackling as I searched through the console for the external lights. Finally, I flipped on the floodlights and immediately regretted that I found it. The street was coated in blood and wine mixed together, still fresh enough not to be frozen in the snow. Written in the fresh red blood on the surrounding buildings was a single name repeated again and again: Vesta. I turned back and checked to make sure Vesta was still there, and she was. They must have found someone else to be their sacrifice for the hearth goddess. The barrels that were everywhere were the same wine that my father purchased all those weeks ago, and they were all marked with my father's mark, the alchemical symbol for Saturn, the same symbol carved into the bare chests of everyone around this bonfire. They were red, but they didn't bleed. The wine was mixed with their blood as they brought the wine to their lips, and it dripped and stained much of their bodies, mixed so much you couldn't tell if the crimson around their hands, chests, feet, mouth, and necks was blood, wine, or both. But it was their eyes that scared me the most. Even when they moved violently or screamed at the sky in never-ending rage, their eyes were blank, like they were sleepwalking, and not even aware of what they were doing. "Pluto," said the head of the pack, a large woman with strong arms and a 10-foot-long spear. The tip of the spear, all the way to the handle, was coated in crimson fluid. She pointed the spear at the killer pillar and screamed at it this time. Pluto! And then her pack started to follow suit. Pluto! Pluto! They all chanted as they jumped from the roofs onto the killer pillar. The doors were locked and I was certain they weren't going to get into the vehicle, but something inside of me screamed to get away. I couldn't back up, so I made the only choice I was able to make. I'm sorry, I said to my sleeping friends as I drove the pedal to the floor, pushing the killer pillar full speed through the bonfire, with the figures clinging onto the outside of the vehicle. I couldn't see outside the glass, but I drove forward through the bumps and screeches, trying to get to the other side of the street. The pack outside wouldn't be able to survive the flames, so they would be dropping off the killer pillar, whether they wanted to or not. The heat would force them to drop and leave us free from them. I was pretty certain that the killer pillar could handle the temperature of the bonfire. Almost certain. I thought it could handle the heat. Okay, I panicked and I didn't think it through until after I had done it. Finally, after 30 seconds inside the flames, we pushed through and made it out of the fire without anyone on the outside of the killer pillar. After a safe distance, I paused the driving to see if anyone was going to make their way over the buildings to find us. They didn't, but they found another way. I watched in horror as the pack walked through the flames, and they were untouched by the fire. No burns, no marks. They weren't even coughing from being denied oxygen and being full of smoke. Even the scarlet on their weapons and bodies were untouched. The pack leader pointed her spear at my vehicle, and I decided it was a good idea to start driving. After a few minutes, when I couldn't see them anymore, then Vanessa and her sisters started to stir. What happened? I asked her, and she shrugged. I just got tired, but it doesn't look like anything happened. Everything happened, Vanessa. What does that mean? I explained to her what happened as we got closer to Granny Greta's. Well, that's a lot, Vanessa responded, and I nodded and sighed. And I'm afraid it's only gotten colder outside, I said as we drove past frozen homes, all of them with their doors open and their furniture drug out into long, dead fire piles. No bodies on the street, but the snow was getting deeper and deeper. And I didn't want to know if the patches of red snow were wine or something else. We're almost at Granny Greta's, she said, pointing at where she lived. There was a small fork in the road. The fork on the left led to the uranium and radium mine on her land. The one on the right led to her cottage. I'm not sure where Granny Greta was from, but she wasn't from anywhere near the Central Sea, and it was clear in the way her cottage was built. Villas of Insula Solis were built from many different buildings built around a central plaza or fountain, usually where people met for meals, a shared space, but there were private buildings for everyone. Granny Greta's cottage had multiple floors, but it was all a single building. It was 2 stories tall with a roof that wasn't flat, but slanted, and there was a chimney in the middle of the building that I could see was smoking in the cold weather. We parked in front of her house, and we made sure our cold weather gear was on as we made our way to Granny Greta's. Even though it was less than 5 meters away, it felt like it was leagues away as we trudged through the ankle-deep snow. Even though I wore snow goggles, a face mask, scarf, jacket, thermal underlayer, wool socks, wool gloves, snow boots, and snow gloves, I still felt cold. The door, a few steps away, I trudged forward with Vanessa holding my hand and her sisters holding her hand, all in a line, like we were Basil's victims trying to find their way home. A one-eyed man leading an army of the blind through the snow to safety. Now at the door, I knocked on it. "Granny Greta, please let us in," I asked through the snow. I heard shuffling on the other side of the door. I could see up close, painted on the door, was a golden dove. A background thought reminded me that there was a hint that there was a clue here from the Victoria matriarch Rhea. I heard Granny Greta's voice on the other side of the door. "Does the black moon howl?" Granny Greta asked me. "What?" I asked back. "Answer the question. First thing that comes to mind. I will know if you're lying. Does the black moon howl?" Granny Greta asked, and I finally answered. "Only to startle the sun," I said, and I heard the click of the deadbolt as the door was finally opened, and she rushed us inside of her house. I was never here before, and the first thing I noticed was a strange alchemical symbol made of sticks directly over her fireplace. It resembled a sickle with a cross on the handle. That rang a bell in my mind, but I couldn't recall what that meant. "Get warm by the fire," Granny Greta said as she led us to her fireplace. It was a lot warmer in her house than it was in the Killer Pillar, though I had no idea how she managed that. "Granny, what's going on?" Vanessa asked, and Granny looked around and sighed. "I think we are the only ones left," she said before she tossed another log onto the fireplace, offering us a few cups of something warm. It was brown and smelled like cinnamon, ginger, and chocolate. It was warm like coffee, but it definitely wasn't coffee. "What is this, a potion?" Gemini asked, and Granny Greta nodded. Sorta. It's a common drink from where I come from. It's very popular in the Triple Alliance and the Gothic kingdoms. It was used for treating stomach and liver problems, though nowadays it's more often used for treating chills and keeping people warm," Granny Greta explained, which only made the twins look down at their warm drink. "It tastes very good," Granny Greta said, as she sipped at her own mug. Now convinced, we all took a sip. It was very hot, not quite as hot as a good cup of coffee, but it was still good. It lacked the bitter taste of coffee, and it was very rich, with an almost cream-like top layer, but thinner as I drained the cup. "It's so difficult to get good chocolate on Insula Solis, but I managed," Granny Greta said, as she handed a small wrapped box to the three girls. "It's probably bad timing, but your mother wanted you all to have these when you found the clue to my place. Normally, I wouldn't support giving such gifts to children, but considering what is happening outside, I think it is a lot more practical," she said, giving the gifts to them. She pulled off the tissue paper with ease and revealed waterproof matches inside. "That'll come in handy," I said, but Vanessa, Gemini, and Vesta all stared at the matches deeply and solemnly. Maybe there was a context I was missing? Does that mean we are doing the thing? Gemini asked Vanessa, who nodded. We need to find the mall then? Gemini said, and Vanessa nodded again. Yes, but we have bigger matters on hand right now, she said, turning to Granny Greta. Do you have any idea what is happening? She asked the old woman, who sipped at her hot drink as she sat down in her old rocking chair, rocking back and forth, back and forth. I will tell you what I know, but I don't know everything, Granny Greta said as we listened to her intently. A roaring fireplace near us, hot chocolate being drunk, bundled up in warm clothing, while Granny told us a story that dark Saturnalian night. I had my suspicions for a few weeks now, but I couldn't be certain. I wasn't even certain it was possible, but I know better now. Your father and mother were talking to each other in the market, thinking I wasn't paying attention. But I'm old. I don't stir the tea, but I still drink it before it spills. They had found a copy of a single page from the Atlas of the Apocalypse. There, Saturn found a way to cease the cycle of life and death for himself and Amanda. It took a lot of moving parts, but essentially had to start by interfering with the cycle of the sun. He had to keep the sun from rising again. That was the most difficult task, but the one he had to do first. It had to be done during Saturnalia. I don't know how, but he managed to do that. I have a telescope in my attic. I use it for reading the stars. It's a true joy for me to read the stars and name the patterns as I see them. But at midnight last night, something happened. There's no stars, no moon, no celestial bodies at all. The planet is still rotating. That part is clear because we haven't been flung off the surface, but there are no stars, no sun, no satellites, nothing. As far as I can tell, the entire universe has disappeared. The only thing keeping our planet warm at this point is the greenhouse effect. But even then, something is wrong. Even if our sun disappeared instantly, the greenhouse effect should keep the surface livable, albeit cold, for a few weeks. It should not be this cold this quickly. So something Saturn and Amanda is doing is causing the planet to freeze much quicker than it reasonably should. As you've probably noticed by now, there's no power left on Insula Solis. And it was true. We haven't seen a single streetlight on since the bonfire. I haven't thought about it, but considering it now, it was odd that the power was completely out. The tide generators are completely off now. There's no current and no ways for them to be powered by. Even with the disappearance of the moon, there's still going to be a few small ways due to rotation and whatever dark matter is still out there. But even then, inertia would keep the waves moving for a long time before they slow down. But that isn't what is causing the tidal generators to fail. The ocean is frozen. There was a pause as those words washed over us. Completely frozen. More than a few of the generators are built into the deep sea, over 1,000 meters underwater, so it isn't affected by surface weather. For the ocean to be frozen to a depth of 1,000 meters, that is a level of cold no one on Earth is prepared against, let alone could survive. But still, what your parents did is somehow prepare against it. I think he has to sacrifice 5 people for the cycle of death to be broken. A representation of Jupiter, Neptune, Juno, Vesta, Ceres, and Pluto. Each death grants him and his followers a new immunity, and with the death of all of them, the cycle of death is broken, and then eventually they return the sun to the sky when Saturnalia is over, and then he rules over the ruins of the planet with his immortal army. The deaths that had to occur in that order, and they had to be done in a specific way for the ritual to work. There was a lot of work for it. Jupiter had to be killed first, killed by electricity while wearing his crown. Juno had to have all of her organs enucleated while lying on a marriage bed. Neptune had to be impaled by a trident and drowned in a fountain of salt water. Vesta was to be burned in a hearth or bonfire, while people celebrated her death. Ceres was to have her hands and feet removed with a scythe, before being buried within the soil of a garden or farm. Pluto was to be brought to a place of death and then forced to drink molten gold. That sounds horrible, I said, only to hear Vanessa and the twins mumble. I was too engrossed in Granny Greta's story to try to figure out what they were saying. How do they even know who to kill? How do my parents get everyone to go along with it? It doesn't make sense. Even if my parents wanted to do such a horrible thing, not everyone would go with them. Would they? The answer to both of your questions is in the wine. The wine keeps them entombed within an eternal, waking nightmare, only dimly aware what they are doing, but not giving them control over their actions. Stuck in a dream that they can never wake up from, while also never giving them the peace of true, deep sleep. It shares your father's power with them, but also forces them all to obey him. Anyone who doesn't drink the wine falls asleep when near the ones who have drank the wine. A side effect of the wine's power. But the ones he seeks are immune to that effect and remain awake and immune to the eternal waking nightmare, if they ever drink the wine. Your father will be sending people across the island, looking for anyone who isn't asleep and who isn't serving your father. Eventually, he will find them all, Granny Greta said. I thought about it for a moment before I finally said, You said my parents earlier, but then you said my father. Is my mother willingly going along with this, or is she one of his victims? I asked Granny Greta, who shrugged her shoulders. At this point, does it matter? Whether she drank the wine willingly, knowing what she did, or whether she didn't even know what it would do, she is equally as much a danger. There isn't a way out of the eternal waking nightmare, hence the eternal part. Even death doesn't free them from that madness, Granny Greta said, but I leaned back on the couch and pulled up my scarf. Even with the fire roaring, it was still cold inside of the house, and I couldn't help myself. My final question, Granny Greta, is how do you know all of this? I asked her. One too many things not adding up. She said she heard all of this in an overheard conversation. My parents are a lot of things, but carelessness isn't one of them. They don't even like saying my name in public because they fear someone misusing my name. And everyone on the island already knows our names. So if they were discussing a conspiracy to induce the apocalypse, they wouldn't be talking about it in an open air market where Granny Greta, a well known gossip, was standing, unless she was involved in some way. I guess you got me, Granny Greta said, lifting her hands up in mock surrender. I was the idiot who sold them the copy of the page from the Atlas of the Apocalypse. I didn't think it would actually work, but here we are. Your father told me that if you escaped to my place, he would reward me handsomely. And now his soldiers are almost here, she said, making no motion to stand as I got up and noticed that Vanessa and her sisters were asleep. So my father's minions were nearby. You're Pluto, in case you didn't make that connection, she said, sipping from her hot chocolate. So, his most valuable sacrifice. I don't need to do anything. The storm will keep you inside. Even if you try to hide, try to fight, or try to escape, they'll catch you eventually. And I don't think you're going to leave them behind, she said, pointing at the Victoria girls. I processed the insanity of what was happening until a giggle escaped my lips. The giggle intensified, and then it became a chuckle, and then finally a full-on laugh. While I was laughing, Granny Greta stared at me like I was insane. I guess it's normal to react to an unbelievable situation by laughing, but it isn't going to help or hurt, one way or the other, Granny Greta said, as I finally got my laughter under control. Oh no, it's not that, Granny Greta. It's how stupid you are. I knew you were dumb when we talked in the market, but I didn't realize you were too incompetent to be malicious, let alone too incompetent to pull off a double cross. I think you helped us more by trying to hurt us than you ever could by trying to help us. What the fuck are you talking about, Phyllis? Granny Greta asked, still not getting it. That only brought another laugh from my lips from how absurd it was. I was going to have to spell it out for her. So, they're nearby, which is why Vanessa and the others are asleep, right? Yeah. So, why am I awake? Because you're the final sacrifice. Right. And why are you awake? Realization started to dawn on Granny Greta's face. A connection so obvious that she never would have thought about it. She was too used to the world of deal or no deal. If it wasn't part of a deal, then she wouldn't have to deal with it. But now I've forced her to realize what the true value to my father was by having her in an isolated location that he knew about ahead of time. The only other person on Insula Solis who knew about the plan at all. That can't be right. He promised I would be safe and well taken care of, she said almost like a child who heard that another student broke a pinky promise. Saturn sold out the entire planet for his own selfish goals. Do you think he wouldn't sell you to Satan for a corn chip? And he's allergic to corn, I told her as her eyes widened and she thought about how to hide or escape. Yeah, so you gave me a target they needed before they can get to me. Now I can easily distract them, I told her as she tried to formulate a plan. Maybe we can make a deal. I mean, there's no way for you to outrun them. Maybe we can find a way to survive together, Granny Greta tried to offer. I cracked my knuckles as I gave my counteroffer. I don't need to outrun them. We just need to outrun you, I said. It was easier to break her leg than I expected. She whimpered on the floor near the fireplace that I put another log in. No point if she froze to death before they got there. I didn't have to wait long. I just waited in the living room closet as two members of the pack walked in. Their eyes were glazed over and they saw Granny Greta. Sure enough, they ignored Vanessa and the twins. They didn't know that I was in the closet, and instead they picked up Granny Greta, dragging her broken leg behind her. He's in there! Pluto is right there in the closet! She yelled at them, hoping to get them to release her, or at least to bring me down with herself also. But it didn't work. The sufferers of the eternal waking nightmare were in a perpetual dream state. Thinking through things wasn't something they did. After a few minutes, I grabbed Vanessa, Gemini, and Vesta and put them into the killer pillar. The air outside was so cold, even with my cold weather gear. It felt like I was breathing in needles. I only had one last possible solution I could think of. The killer pillar's heater, even on full blast, barely warmed the vehicle, and I kept my cold weather gear on. The snow outside was now a blizzard. It was up to my chest when we were outside, and it was halfway up the vehicle as I drove the vehicle down to the frozen beach. At this point, I gave up trying to drive carefully as I drove it to the ice. We were all buckled in and we had to get away. My idea was simple. Drive the killer pillar across the Central Sea to the mainland, and then try to stay warm and survive until the curse is over and the sun returns. Even though the killer pillar was amphibious, normally I wouldn't try to drive it to the mainland. With the sea frozen, though, I was willing to take my chances, especially knowing I was going to be a sacrifice. After a few minutes, Vanessa and the twins woke up, and I explained everything to them. It was grim, but better for them to know. After explaining it, we continued our drive across the ocean. GPS was out, but the compass still worked. My geography was bad, but I know if we headed east, we would hit land within a few hours. It grew colder within the killer pillar. The thermostat recorded the temperature as being just above zero, but the external temperature was much worse. The digital thermometer was only getting an error message, but the last recorded temperature before it completely glitched out was negative 120 degrees Celsius. And now it was literally too cold to be measured. No location on Earth ever got this cold. Not even the depths of the southern vortex are considered to be this cold. If we didn't get help or something changed, I was certain the killer pillar was going to fail. The engine has been making weird noises the last few kilometers, and I knew the cold wasn't helping. Please, 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 I said, just as I saw a light ahead. At first, I thought it was a mirage, but as we got closer and it got brighter, I felt my heart warm. If there was light, there was power. There was hope. We made it to the mainland. Vanessa and the twins cheered as I got closer and closer. But as the blizzard took a rare pause, we saw what the light was, and I felt my heart drop. No, 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 no! I said. The killer pillar idled as I took my foot off the gas, and it dragged forward slowly. This shouldn't be possible. We drove away. We went east. We shouldn't be here. We drove away from it, so how did we come back to it? In front of us, jutting from the frozen ocean, was the Western Lighthouse. The one turned into a radio station. The light now on, somehow, and offering light. My father didn't just take away the sun, moon, and stars. He took the entire world away. Where were we going to escape to now? There wasn't anywhere warm left on Insula Solis, and the heater was going to go out soon. We would be frozen solid within just a few hours, and that was not going to be an easy way to die. What do we do? I asked the others, at a loss for words and ideas. I didn't want to give up, but there wasn't any way out of this, as far as I knew. What I didn't expect was for Vesta to answer. Thermal caves, she said softly. I turned to hear her, and so did Vanessa. Thermal caves? I asked her, and Vesta pointed at her book of matches. On it was the name of a local national park, the Thermal Caves, the geothermal caves under Insula Solis, the same that powered the Vanguard station. Her mother must have bought the matches at the national park's gift shop. But why? Thermal caves, always warm. It gets up to 100 degrees in some places. The earth superheats water and it warms the caves. Even during the last ice age, the caves were warm, Vesta recited, and I felt a glimmer of hope. Aren't the caves near here? I asked Vanessa, and she nodded. They aren't far. Let me guide you, she said as the killer pillar limped to the thermal caves. Thankfully, the parking for the caves was within the caves themselves, out of the cold and away from the freezing world. There were no cars inside the parking garage, thankfully, but it was warm. According to the digital thermometer, it was 10 degrees. Ice broke off the outside of the killer pillar. A gift shop stood by the entrance to the cave proper. In fact, it was the only proper way into the cave, by offering a stairway deeper inside. We started getting out when Gemini pointed excitedly at a boulder nearby. Gifts, she said, running towards it. Sure enough, there was a golden dove made of chalk, and we ran to it. Sure enough, there were 3 children's packs. Inside of them was a helmet with a flashlight, a map of the caves, flashlight batteries, water bottles, and a note from their mother. Vanessa read hers out loud for her sisters and my benefit. Daughters, you are getting older, and you are changing, and so is the world. Much of the world as it is now is something that you do not understand, but that doesn't make the world a scary place. It means it is something you must face to grow. I fear something is coming, so just in case, I decided to have your rite of passage where you are all together. Deep in the caves, inside the Omega Chamber, is a series of candles. Light them, and you will move on to the next part of your lives. I cannot wait to see the young women you 3 grow into, the note said, bringing a tear to Vanessa's eyes. The twins didn't understand it nearly as much, but they were excited to go deeper into the cave. And then I noticed all 3 of them yawned at the same time. Oh no, 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 I said, turning back to the entrance of the cave. Two familiar figures stood by it. "Ah, Tavit, quick, you three have to get deeper into the cave. Get warm," I warned them. Vanessa yawned again and asked, What are you going to do?" I turned back to her, putting on my mask and scarf again. "I'm the one they want. I can act as bait for them," I said, taking something out of my backpack and giving the backpack to Vanessa. "Hurry and get some distance," I warned her as I turned to face my parents at the mouth of the cave. They stood outside in the snow, and when I approached them, I kept the item strapped to the back of my jacket. I had to be careful as I approached them. Both of them were bare-chested in the snow, with the mark of Saturn carved into their chests. Even out in the sub-100-degree temperatures, they didn't so much as shiver. They both had spears in hand, and though I could see their breath, they didn't seem at all bothered to see me. But it was their eyes that unsettled me the most. Unlike everyone else who drank the wine, their eyes weren't misty and asleep. They were focused, intelligent, familiar. They were my parents, through and through, both of them. So they weren't victims. They were the cause of this harm. "Just come with us, son. We're so close to breaking the cycle of death. One more sacrifice, just one more, and no one else will ever need to get sick, age, or die anymore. Just be unselfish for one moment, and we can live forever," my father said, extending his hand to me, not crossing under the threshold of the faceless angel statue that was built over the entrance of the thermal caves. "So you can live forever," I said, and he nodded. "That's what I said. One moment, one sacrifice, and it'll all be over. We'll even leave your friends alone so they can live in the new world. My numbers are legion. We can swarm these caves and kill them. Even if we never find them, the ne- the eternal waking nightmare will keep them asleep. They may drown, fall off a rock face, or maybe even starve to death. Just come with us willingly, or that is the fate they have," my father said. I turned to my mother. "And you agree with this?" I asked her. My mother only scoffed. "Whose idea do you think this was? You don't know what it's like to have been the most intelligent, most beautiful woman on all of Insula Solus, and then feel time's grip over your mind and body. Nothing I can do would stop it, but this was the way to stop it. We just need one more sacrifice, and it's ours." "Do you even love me?" I asked them both. "Of course we do," they both said simultaneously, and in that moment I believed them. I saw it in their eyes. They did love me, with all of their hearts, but it was the same love a predator holds for prey, the same love that greed had for gold, the same love that fire has of dry wood. They saw me as someone to consume, and they would love nothing more than to do that. "Well, that makes this easy," I said, turning around, taking something in my back pocket as I stepped forward. I felt them grab my shoulders, and taking the gun I kept in my pocket, I aimed it at the ceiling where the angel statue was built. Bang, bang, bang. The statue came crumbling down, and I ran forward with my parents letting go of my shoulders. Sure enough, they valued their own lives more than their own goals. A wolf would stop pursuing a deer if it was itself in danger. I gave the wolves their danger, and I was escaping. I ran forward, seeing that the way out was now caved in. But even so, in the rubble, I could see the angel's empty face gaze upon me. I couldn't tell if it was in judgment or in appreciation, but I thanked the angel as I went into the gift shop and descended into the thermal caves. Thankfully, the gift shop had extra helmets with lights and maps to the Omega Chamber. The cave had 3 major chambers, all of them well mapped out, but still, it was good to have a map. The first chamber, the Alpha Chamber, had 3 pillars and the water below was boiling and smelled of rotten eggs. But it kept the chamber warm. Not just warm for the outside temperature, but truly warm enough. I was able to take off my outer layers as I walked down the metal walkway. I wanted to call out for them, but I kept quiet as I followed the walkway. As far as rite of passages went, this one felt simple. Explore an already explored cave and find some candles. It seemed easy, but maybe there was context I was missing. The Beta chamber was well lit. The park was also powered by geothermal power. I saw pipes lead into the boiling pools below. This must be what powered Vanguard Station. I wasn't sure if there was anything left in that station worth powering, but still, it was nice to be warm. The Omega Chamber was the smallest, maybe 10 meters across, and the walkway ended at a tunnel that led deeper into the cave. I checked the map, but there was no such tunnel marked on the map. What I did see on the chamber was a small natural shelf that had a white lit candle on it, marked with a golden dove. It was lit, so I knew that they were here before. Maybe there was something deeper inside of the cave. I stepped into the tunnel and carefully followed it with my headlamp on. The candles were all spaced apart by about 3 meters or so, just far enough that I could see the next one as the tunnel twisted and turned. After about 5 minutes, I saw artificial light just ahead. Passing the final candle, I stepped onto the platform and back into the Omega Chamber. "What's happening?" I asked, only to see Vanessa peer around the corner. "Pluto, you're here!" she said, running up to me as she hugged me, her sisters following close behind. "Did we get turned around?" I asked her, but she shook her head. "No, we didn't. We're somewhere else. Let me show you." She grabbed my hand and led me through the chambers. After passing through the gift shop, we made it to the parking garage. The first thing I noticed was the missing killer pillar, but then I noticed the cave-in was also missing. The outside world was as bright and sunny as ever. The first time I saw sunlight in what felt like a week. "No way, the sun is back," I said as we made our way outside. It took us longer to realize what was wrong with this Insula Solis. Everyone was missing, and so was the evidence of everything that happened. No trash, no destroyed homes. It was like everyone just vanished at the same time. So, naturally, we made our way to Vanguard Station. Thankfully, their radio worked and we called for help. And that's what we're doing now, waiting for help at the thermal caves. We even went back to the Omega Chamber, but we couldn't find the tunnel or the candle that marked it anymore. Wherever my father and his followers were now, I was away from him, and he wasn't going to reach us. He hasn't succeeded, and I don't think he will survive much longer in the world with no sun. But I made a promise to myself while we waited for Vanguard's boat to show up for us. Someday I am going back, and I will take my revenge on him. That I promised myself as I watched the sun finish rising on the last day of Saturnalia.